Welcome, everybody, to Legal Tech Week for December 8th, 2023. This is the show where we get together every Friday afternoon and talk about the top stories in legal tech and innovation. Friday afternoon, I guess, for us East Coast people, Friday sometime for the rest of you. And it's this is I'm Bob Ambrogi. I write the blog Law Sites and have the podcast Law Next. And our panelists today are who you see before you, and we'll go around and introduce ourselves. Steve, you want to kick it off?
Sure. I'm Steve Embry. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads, and I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, where it's a nice warm day today for a change. So good to see everybody.
All right. And Niki.
My name's Niki Black. I'm in Rochester, New York. It's not a nice warm day. I It made me really sad.
Sorry.
I'm SME and external education at my case in Law Pay. I write legal tech columns for ABA Journal, Above the Law, and the Daily Record, and I also oversee and write our the benchmark reports at my case in Law Pay, and also our legal industry survey report.
All right. And Victor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Lee. I am Assistant Managing Editor for the ABA Journal, covering business of law and technology. I'm in Chicago, and actually, it's unseasonably warm here. It's a little unsettling, honestly. Of course, my son's reaction was, "Oh, can we go outside today?" So, good to see he's not worried about the long-term implications of climate change. Just wants to go outside and play. So,
All right. And a Christmas tree-less Joe.
Yeah, Joe Patrice from Above the Law. I am thinking like a lawyer podcast. It is warm here. It's not super hot, but it's like 50 degrees or something like that. That's not bad here in just outside of New York.
The weird thing is, I just came from Miami, and where I was at this TLTF summit, which I'll talk about. But one of the days in Miami, it was really kind of cold. It was like in the 60s, but it felt even colder. The wind was blowing, and I had a sweater on walking outside. It was kind of chilly, oddly enough, but didn't feel cold at all when I stepped off. I mean, compared to what I felt when I stepped off the plane in Boston last night, it felt cold again. Anyway, well, maybe I'll kick off with this just because there wasn't a whole lot of legal tech news this week, or at least we didn't all report a whole lot of legal tech news this week. It might have been happening, but maybe we were all busy with other stuff. But we have some to talk about. But yeah, I spent this past week at the TLTF summit. Stephanie Wilkins, who's usually on the show, was there as well. Stephanie couldn't be with us today. And which means we effectively doubled our press coverage of this event from last year when I was the only reporter there. Stephanie was there. There are actually a couple of other people who were there, kind of in the media guys this year. But this is the summit that's put on by the Legal Tech Fund, which is a VC fund devoted to legal tech funding, and this is the second year they did it. Last year, I wrote a really glowing review of this summit. I called it like the Soros event of legal tech. It was a very intimate, unique get together of investors, of legal tech startups, of more established founders of legal tech companies, some people from kind of law firm innovation, corporate legal, academia. And I kind of wondered whether they'd be able to do it again this year or replicate it again, because it was so unique. It was such a wonderful conference last year. And this year they more than doubled the size of it, which was not to say it's huge, because last year was, I think, around 200. This year was a little over 400. Very different venue this year. Last year it was right in downtown Miami in a kind of a high rise with a nice view out over the bay. This year it was up in Aventura, north of Miami, on a kind of a sprawling grounds that Zach Posner, the founder of the Legal Tech Funds, kind of analogized to the Stanford campus if you ever walked around there, and it is a little bit like that. And he said that was by design. It was interesting that Zach got up to give the opening of this conference. And I have to say, as a side note, in kudos to Zach, maybe, whereas some conference organizers will get up and talk at length to introduce the conference. Zach is a man of few words, and gets up and says a few words, and then makes way for the other speakers and panelists, which is kind of a nice thing. But what he did say is that he alluded to the writer Jim Collins, who talks about something called who luck, which is the sort of the luck of who you encounter and develop conversations with and potentially relationships with. And he said he wanted this conference to be all about making who luck happen. He literally, in his opening remarks, said, I encourage everybody to skip a session or skip every single session and just take a walk with somebody or sit and talk to somebody. And so that's the kind of conference it is. It's a unique conference in the sense that, as I said, is first of all, it's one of the only conferences that kind of openly brings together the investor community as part of the conference. I mean, I know that if you go to ILTA or you go to Legal Week or you go to ABA Tech Show, there are investors there who are kind of wandering in the shadows, checking out some of the products and whatever else. But at this conference, they're out there talking, participating, being part of the panels. And that's something you don't get to see a lot. And it's also one of the few conferences you go to where there's no sales going on here. There's no exhibit hall. There are no sponsors per se. I guess there are actually some sponsors because you see some logos around, but there's nowhere where they're talking about themselves other than in designated pitch competitions. There is like a whole startup pitch competition that goes on through the conference where every day they do have a couple of different sessions of startups giving pitches, and there are winners announced at the end of it all. But there's also, it's like a who's who of kind of the legal tech world in a sense. I mean, I was sort of grimly thinking about, if somebody dropped a bomb on the JW Marriott Ventura right now, half the legal tech world would be wiped out because there were a lot of leaders of a lot of companies and a lot of big names there, a lot of investors, a lot of, again, people from academics who run innovation institutes and law. So I haven't written anything yet. I want to write something up about it, but I think they've effectively done a good job of doing again the second year what they did the first year, maybe a little bit less of an intimate feel to it, but still that sort of air of spontaneous, fascinating conversations with people involved in what's coming in legal tech, not just talk about what's happening now, but really what's coming down the pike. So for all of you who couldn't go, hope you can try and make it again next year.
Was that the one that you got invited to? And then you held it over our heads for the whole year? Or was that the one?
Yeah. That was the one. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
That was, yeah, last year. Last year I was the only media person invited to it for some reason. And it's all off the record also. So it's what Chatham House rules or whatever they call that, where you're not supposed to quote anybody. You're not supposed to really sort of substantively talk about anything anybody says. And I like that, although I can't say that I heard anybody say anything that they wouldn't have said in any other panel anywhere else. It didn't, at least certainly not on any panel. Maybe the offline conversations were different, of course, but the panels themselves were, more or less the same stuff you'd hear anywhere and people talking about the same stuff. But some good presentations, and Dan Katz kicked it all off with a kind of an opening program. I think it was 160 slides or something like that in like 20 minutes. He has the ability to do that rapid fire slide delivery, but basically on the whole sort of history and state of generative AI and legal. And it was a pretty fascinating presentation. As a matter of fact, if I can find the link, I'll put it in the chat. He posted his slides. Here they are. I'll drop them in the chat at some point. But anyway, that's I wish Stephanie was here because I would have loved to hear her thoughts on it. And maybe next week we can talk a little bit more about it. But anyway, that was my week. And hopefully they do it again next year. We'll see. So from there, what else is happening this week? Well, actually, Niki, I know Niki and I just in the green room went back and forth a little bit about talking about this story, but you wrote about kind of a little bit of an overview on Above the Law about AI ethics. And it was actually something that was being talked a lot about at this conference that I was at. I think at the conference, they were talking about it with somewhat of from a skeptical viewpoint about whether there should be specific AI a regulation directed at the lawyers' use, right? Any legal regulation directed at lawyers' use of AI, and they're talking about some of the court rules that have been coming down. But what did you find this week?
I wrote it Above the Law about the intersection of the ethics guidance coming down and the major, companies announcing a public release of their integrated generative AI tools. So Thomson Reuters, LexisNexis, and then California issuing their opinion. The Florida proposed opinion has been released. So I just sort of talked about the convergence of these two things, sort of being indicative of sort of the stage as it just sort of the coming tidal wave, I guess, if you will. It's here. I feel like the tidal wave has arrived, and I just think it's notable that those things kind of happened at the same time. But in terms of, is the ethics guidance needed? I don't think that it's technically needed. I think that the opinions that are already out there, I think that the rules and the comments to the rules are more than sufficient to cover this technology, but I think that it is necessary in the current climate to give lawyers a security blanket to kind of hold on to their blankie. So they're like, oh, there's guidance and it says I can do this, so it's okay. So it kind of gets them over the hurdle of using this technology that they really want to use. I think that there is this thirst for this technology. So I don't think it's technically needed, but I think practically speaking, it's necessary in order to kind of usher this into the firms so that they don't refrain from allowing their employees and other lawyers, whatever the case, however you want to call. By the way, what do you call everyone who is in a firm? What do you call them? Like, maybe people in the comments can let me know, because you've got the partners. I always struggle with this. Partners, they're not employees. Then you've got the legal professionals. You've got the associates who are lawyers. What's a blanket term for everyone who's in a firm? There's members for the equity.
Unhappy.
Right? But so I never have like a term for that, but I usher it out into the into their
who is using, for a while someone was using affiliated professionals, but that's sort of that doesn't encompass everybody, so that doesn't answer your question either. But
I've never been able to think of an umbrella term for everyone that is inside of a law firm that works in it in one capacity or another.
and employees doesn't work, because technically the lawyers aren't employees.
Right. It's really
We're
challenging.
getting some good ones in the comments, though, I gotta say.
Inmates.
But just to like close my point out in one sentence, I think that it's necessary to usher in, it for the attorneys to have this available to them so that they can roll it into their firm with confidence that they're not violating ethical obligations, because they have this guidance or roadmap, if you will, that tells them what they can and can't do and what they have to look for when they roll it out. So I thought that was interesting. And then I have a backup story if you need it. I don't know if we're going to.
Do we look needy here? No, you know what was the stuff that you outlined that came out of this ethics committee again is like the stuff we all know already. I mean, that the ethics rules already require of lawyers. I mean, maybe some lawyers somehow need it applied specifically to AI, but duty of confidentiality, duty to supervise, duty of tech competence. I mean, this applies to the use of any kind of technology, not specifically to AI. One thing I thought that was interesting was the part about charging for work produced by generative AI, and which the way you wrote it up here, it says lawyers may charge for the time spent creating, refining, and reviewing generative AI outputs, but must not charge for the time saved by using generative AI. And I thought that was interesting, because what happens if a lawyer is charging on a flat fee or value-based basis where effectively they might be charging for the time saved by using AI in setting a flat fee or a value-based fee. In other words, if they say, you know, I'm going to do a will for X dollars, and the reason, and part of the reason I'm able to charge that for the will is because I'm using AI to help me save time in creating that will. Are they not able somehow to set a flat fee around that? I don't know if that's even a question that makes sense, but it seems like a gray area, at least in terms of setting fees
But
around this.
there is the ethical rule that can't recite it verbatim, but it's you're not to charge an unreasonable fee. I don't know if it also relates that to time or whatever, but I do know that there is a ethical rule that talks about the reasonableness of fees. But
Yeah,
I
and
guess that
I
would
don't know.
kind of be the issue you're sort of getting at, Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I don't know if it's standard in the industry, but like last time I used a lawyer, I got like an itemized list of like what was charged. Like they charged this for the filing, this for the drafting the complaint, the petition, and this. So I mean, I assume as long as you don't put on there, I charge this much for the time I saved by using generative AI, then I assume that'd be fine.
Well, and I to me it seems akin to when online legal research showed up on the scene, right? You're no longer opening books, going through all the books, getting all this, you're entering a query, and then you already have the cases in front of you where you would have spent all this time just sort of sifting through all the books and trying to follow that path. So in my mind, it's a lot like that. You are using technology to get you quicker to the analysis part. And with legal research, we didn't say, well, we would have spent 5 hours in the books before we started this analysis. So we're going to tack 5 hours on, and you shouldn't be doing the same thing here. But I think the way that you phrased it is really interesting, Bob, and I hadn't thought of it that way, which is, and I think it was addressed in the comments. Matthew said value-based billing and other alternative billing models decouple time from money, so it's fine. And there seems to be a little bit of a debate about that, but that's how I think of it. So, and the other thing that I think will be interesting is when you can use generative AI to apply it towards your firm's data to better predict how much what your flat fee should be so that you'll still be making money but can undercut your competitors. That's where I think we have that whole billable hour possibly being upended coming in. So I'm super excited about it. Not necessarily about that, the opinion, but about sort of the potential of the potential there.
Well, no
You
one.
know,
I mean, people don't usually question plaintiff lawyers' contingency fees. It is what it is, and nobody says, "Well, wait a minute, you took a." I guess in some of the class action approval things, you get into this, but a typical like a personal injury case, nobody says, "Well, you took a third of the recovery, but it only took you, 2 phone calls, so therefore you should get less."
Sometimes in criminal cases, people will, if there's a quick plea and they took a $10,000 retainer, they will, out of they'll feel ethically bound to return some of it. I know people that
But do
did
it
that
like
when
they,
I was practicing. So
There you go.
sometimes they'll do that, but I don't know what that's going to look like in reality. But what if you're doing it
well,
with other?
yeah, it's interesting, the value-based and flat fee stuff, which, we're entering like year 300 of the legal profession saying that that's just around the corner. But, this does raise an interesting question. If AI is the sort of technology that is capable of doing this and making these legal work so efficient, is it going to become one of those situations where firms finally flock to that kind of billing so that they can get some kind of, profit off of the AI situation? Because if they keep with the billable hour and AI pares that down to nothing, it's hard to pay salaries when you do that.
And yes, relatedly, it's also could be the end of the whole leverage model in law firms that have made so many, particularly big law firms and big law firm partners, quite wealthy. You don't need 3 associates to do stuff. You can just ask ChatGPT to do it.
yep. Well, while we're on the topic of wealthy lawyers, it's not exactly a tech topic, but Joe, there's been some news in that regard this week, right?
Yeah, so I work at Above the Law, so I haven't
You
done
do.
anything. I haven't done anything to talk about raises and bonuses for a couple weeks now. I live in a world where that's all that's happening to me. But I did so I didn't really have a tech story, but I did start thinking about the tech implications of it. And I think this is we had kind of already were getting into it. What happens with these associate compensation and the big money going into there with the advances that we're having? Uh, there's a few angles that I thought were interesting to this. Uh, one argument I got into over social media was I have been fairly adamant that the the number looks big when you look at it in isolation, that a first year associate's going to make 200 whatever. But when you adjust for inflation back to the beginning of my career, it's pretty much the same. The 125 I got my first year is about what this is worth today. So it's inflation explains a lot of that. But Professor Orrin Kerr made a point that if you abstract beyond that, go beyond that 125 when I came in to the 80s, and they would adjust from where people were getting paid in the 80s, it's nowhere close. It would be they'd be making adjusted for inflation like 150 now. And so what we started talking about was, is there, in addition to the inflation issue, has there been such a noticeable and tangible increase in the productivity and value of lawyers that justifies this increased pay? And we both kind of concluded that there was. And I think that does speak to where technology is. A lawyer is more valuable, not just because they can do things faster, but the level to which things like online, online legal research and so on have made the ability to be a lawyer better. You are less likely to screw things up, less likely to miss stuff, so on and so forth. So it's not just that it was time saving, it actually made you a better attorney. And that is part of the reason why people get.
Oops, you just got cut off, Joe. Or did I get cut off? Did I get cut off?
I can hear you, Bob.
All of a sudden,
I
he
can't
just
hear
sort of-
Joe.
yeah.
Joe, you lost your voice.
He's just getting to the good part too.
I know.
Okay, can anybody hear me?
Oh, there you are.
Yes,
You're back.
there you're back.
Okay.
You
All
have
right.
to hold your hand up like this, like
I know it's. I got to adjust the rabbit ears. I don't know where I cut off, but but yeah. So I thought that was one.
Just start at the beginning.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I thought that was one aspect of this that was interesting. That Legaltech has made for more productive lawyers, and that justifies this. The other half is what we were just talking about. Actually, was what is the future of these high income associates in a world where technology is going to take over a lot of those rote tasks that we assign to first and second year attorneys? Does it lead to a world of kind of a backlash where they don't make that money, or is it actually going to be something that we figure out over the course of the next couple of years how they provide value within the context of AI? So those were the musings that I had as I thought about tech and money. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts.
Do you think the associates will really be affected though? Because I mean, it seems like the ones that will really be affected will be like the contract attorneys, or like the temp attorneys, or like the e-discovery lawyers and whatnot, or the ones on contract that they bring in to do the document review. I mean, I feel like ultimately associates, it's almost like their status symbols. It's like, they'll be fine no matter what because they were chosen to be at this firm, to not just do the work, but also be as like a representative. Be like, hey, look at all these guys from Harvard we got. Look at all these people from Columbia we got. Look at all these bright minds that we have, and they'll come up with work for them. They always do. But like, yeah, I do kind of feel like, yeah, I mean, they'll be fine, but I mean, yeah, maybe it'll change the nature of their job, and maybe there might be some financial pressure, but yeah, I feel like the ones that'll get hurt will be the ones who are there like on contract or like on doing the temp work or the doc review.
And well, Victor, I think you're right, but it sort of depends on the segment of the market that you're looking at too. I think because the big law firms, the ones that the AmLaw 100 or AmLaw 50, and they're always going to have work. There's always going to be tons of work because if it's a big important matter, that's who you go to. But when you start going down sort of the hierarchy of law firms, and you start getting the mid-level law firms or even smaller law firms, that's where it could be a greater impact. Maybe not even small one, but the mid-sized law firms who employ a lot of lawyers, particularly associates that do that kind of scut work that generative AI can do, and they may not need them anymore.
Well, and there's going to be,
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and then we have to start wondering about the training aspect. There's already an argument that it's ridiculous to pay this much and bill this much for on-the-job training of associate, which is what the first couple of years are. Obviously, I come from the litigation side of things, but transactional attorneys, like sitting around and drafting clauses is their whole jam. And that's something that it strikes me AI is going to ultimately be really good about doing for them. It's going to be really good about scanning the 8 million agreements in the market and determining what the right language is. And that's, how do you learn when the thing's doing it for you and you're not up at 3 a.m. turning a draft?
But so did I understand? I mean, is your basic premise that in fact technology has warrants this higher compensation, not just because it makes lawyers more productive, but because it actually makes them better lawyers and deliver better better results or whatever? That's a tough one. I don't know if I swallow that or accept that. I mean, there's a couple of sides to that, but one is, we've talked about it. The old timers like myself will talk about the fact that one of the problems is we've lost the whole deliberative nature of legal practice and the ability to sort of sit and reflect and think. And I guess on one hand, you could make the argument that maybe you don't need to deliberate as much because you can do the research more quickly and whatever else. But I do feel like there's this tendency to try and give advice as quickly as possible or handle matters as quickly as possible, that where you do lose some of what you would get out of greater deliberation. And there's also the whole thing, just document automation. Like let's find the form we used before and do it again and adapt it. And is that always the best way to deliver legal services? I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe as the old timer on the call, I feel like there's something to be said for the older, slower ways of delivering legal services.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Joe though, Bob. I mean, I'm thinking back
Well,
to
you're
when
a lot
a lot
younger
of the
than me,
things.
Steve, so you wouldn't know what
Right.
I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I don't know anything anyway, so it's okay. I think back when I was a younger lawyer, I spent a lot of time in dusty warehouses looking at documents. I don't think I learned very much about being a lawyer from that. That was just, about the only thing I learned is what a crappy job that was to do. So, we're talking about people that are smart and energetic, and I think they will use the tools and are using the tools and have more time to have sort of that deliberation time to think about strategy and those sorts of things. If you don't have to spend all your time paging through dusty volumes of documents someplace, you might have a little more time to think.
Yeah, but that doesn't describe big law associates though, does it? They're not doing the deliberation anyway. They're doing the production. They're doing the crank it out stuff.
Well,
I always go back to, because this is one of my favorite stories. When I started at Cleary, they still kind of fancied themselves generalists, even though we clearly all were like litigators and transit. We all had departments, but we pretended we didn't. So we all trained together. And I remember a prominent corporate partner getting up and explaining that all your life you've been told that plagiarism's bad, but I want to be very clear, plagiarism is your friend. And he was adamant that we have a bunch of knowledge that we've accumulated, and I want you to use what we've done before. I don't want you going off road, whatever. And that stuck with me about how transactional practice works. But my friends who were in corporate, what they did was dig manually through everything in the document management system to find stuff. That's the sort of thing that now once you accept that plagiarism is your friend and you should be copying what we've done in the past, AI is going to make that go a lot faster.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to the point, I think it was Vishal in the chat made the point that older, slower way of delivery is not what clients want to pay for. I get that. I understand that. I'm just kind of questioning the proposition that perhaps the advice is somehow better or the work product is somehow better. I mean, I think in many cases it is, but across the board, I don't know. And whether it justifies that much higher pay to big law associates, I don't know. But who knows? Steve is back. That's good.
Well, it's like what happens when you get your food too quickly at a restaurant, right? You're like, wait a minute, hold on, like why did it come here so quickly? So it's kind of like, yeah, this idea of like, well, if it took, yeah, it's like the idea is like if it took, well, yeah, like the other day we got our takeout, like I think within like 10 minutes after we ordered it, we were like, hold on a second. Yeah, but I mean, so I guess there is that idea of like that psychological, whatever that, yeah, if it's really good, it probably takes longer to do it, or if someone takes longer to do something, that means they did a better job on it. Well, that's not necessarily true. It just means that they took longer on it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. There's the question about whether technology makes associates worth more money. Then there's also the question of whether having a entirely technologically enabled delivered law firm is a viable business model. Perhaps, I don't know. Is that at all a transition to what you have us to talk about this week, Victor?
I'll allow it. Yeah, like well, actually, this is just a pickup of a story on law.com. So it says two practice leaders at FisherBroyles, which is a virtual law firm. They announced that they are leaving the firm to announce details of a significant new venture shortly. And so law.com did some digging, and they found that there is the two lawyers in question, like they registered like their names with of a new entity in Delaware. And so the thing is that they're going to make their own, they're basically creating their own shop. And based on sources, they said that almost 140 FisherBroyles lawyers could be following them. So it seems like a pretty big defection. And I remember, obviously, this isn't, I mean, this isn't anything new. I mean, this happens all the time in the law firm world. But I remember like when FisherBroyles first came up with their business model, like I think they're all virtual. I think they have some physical locations, but they're really more for like just if they have to meet people or whatnot. All the lawyers are scattered all over all over the place, and that was their big calling. Their big calling card was, hey, we provide flexibility. I think they also had an interesting business model where they let partners keep I think 80% of up to 80% of what they bill, which is pretty much unheard of. And so between the extra money and then also the virtual model, I think the idea was, they're really far ahead. They're really far ahead of the curve, and they have this really interesting business model and whatnot. But the flip side was, well, okay, what if that causes some lawyers to maybe not necessarily feel loyal to the firm because they haven't been able to develop much of an identity together. They don't have much of a shared culture. They don't have much of a relationship with each other that doesn't take place on Zoom and whatnot. And what happens if then they decide, hey, you know what, we can get a better deal if we go this way, or if we set up our own shop, or if we do this. And I think this is kind of like what we're seeing now. It's like, okay, well, now these lawyers at least clearly think that they can they can do better on their own. And so I don't know if that's going to lead to like a mass exodus or anything. I mean, I'm sure they'll be fine, but yeah, I mean, you never want to see that many lawyers leave at once. I mean, and that's always a red flag whenever we're looking at law firms that go bust. And so, I mean, I don't know if there's anything else going on, but just the idea that all these lawyers could be leaving to start their own shop is definitely an eyebrow raiser, and makes you kind of wonder like what's next.
I love the quote from law.com in the ABA Journal story. It has it, but when the firm was asked about this, the response was, as a leading AmLaw 200 firm, we look forward with confidence to 2024 and providing our clients with all the world-class legal services they've come to expect from FisherBroyles. which is a complete non-response to the question
Yeah.
put to them.
I mean, I guess maybe they're hoping they can pick up more lawyers. Just, I mean, who knows? Maybe if more law firms start enforcing, the return to work policies or whatnot, maybe they're hoping that they can pick up more lawyers from disaffected lawyers from those firms. But yeah, I don't know. It's you never want to see that many people jump ship at once, and so I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, like I think the whole distributed virtual law firm model, it makes sense and is here to stay, especially in a nobody wants to go back to work kind of world. But there is something to be said for, live by the sword, die by the sword. When you base your whole thing on you kind of are your own boss and you get to do your own thing. That means they can leave and go do their own thing somewhere else. Like there's a lot less holding you into the firm, which is both good and bad. I'm not sure it's all that bad for FisherBroyles. Like obviously this is a hit, but I don't think anybody. I don't know. I think a lot of people are going to read the relationship with clients' relationships with FisherBroyles is rarely with FisherBroyles. It's with the lawyer under the FisherBroyles umbrella that they happen to like. I know that's true of a lot of firms, but it's really true there more than it is at a Cleary or a Skadden or something. So I think it'll be. I think they'll be okay.
All right. Well, from dysfunctional large firms, we can move to dysfunctional small firms, thanks to Steve Embry.
I thought you were going to say we can move to the dysfunctional panelist.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I put in a story about the survey that Smokeball did. And the interesting thing about it was it was primarily surveyed small law firms that were of less than 30 employees. So you're really sort of getting down to the smaller end of the market. And you always have to be a little leery when you read these kind of surveys because sometimes you can get the survey results that you want to get that sort of justifies what you're doing. But there were some interesting things here. One of the things I thought was really interesting was that 50% of the people, the lawyers they surveyed, didn't know whether their billings went up last year or went down last year. Which I mean, I read that and go, how can that possibly be that you're in a business and you don't know if you went up or went down last year? And then the 30% of the firms they surveyed said that they had no idea what drove the growth that they had. 25 a quarter of them did not even have marketing plans. So I mean, I just was looking at this going, well, that's really sort of weird. And then they queried the firms on AI, and I was particularly intrigued by these results. But what I don't know is if the questions were about AI or generative AI. The report just said AI, but in any event, 50% of the people they surveyed believed that AI would transform their practice in the future. But then 83% of them had ethical concerns about AI, and another 83% were uneasy about using AI for research or contract analysis. And the thing that I sort of wondered about when I read that is if they asked them about AI and that many people said, I don't want to use AI for research or contract analysis. I mean, they've sort of been doing that for a while, and it sort of would reflect a misunderstanding of the difference between AI and generative AI, I think. But in any event, it was a lot of sort of interesting findings that a lot of the firms they surveyed were interested in growing and hiring new people. But 70% of the firms, at least with more than 3 people, said if you want to work for us, you have to be in the office full time, which is really kind of a disconnect in a lot of ways, because you've got a labor force that doesn't want to go to an office. You've got firms competing for that labor force, and then you have this many firms saying, but if you want to work for us, you're going to have to toe the line and be in here every day. And anecdotally, I've heard any number of lawyers from smaller firms say, "Oh, it's just so hard to get these lazy associates to come to work for us. They don't want to work and they want to stay home." But it's sort of a sort of a disconnect there. Then the final thing that I didn't pick up in my report, but Cassandra Coyer did in hers, is that it seemed to be that the personal injury firms were quicker to adopt the generative AI tools, or I guess AI tools is how, depending on how it's phrased, than the other firms. And a lot of, could be a lot of explanations for that, but it could also be that if you're surveying, well, at the smaller end of the market, if you're talking to a lawyer in a personal injury firm, that's probably going to be a plaintiff's lawyer that works on a contingency fee. And it would make a lot of sense for them to want to use these tools because every minute saved is a dollar earned, if you will. So anyway, I thought it was a pretty interesting report, mainly because it kind of looked at this smaller end of the market. And like a lot of people that report on this stuff, we tend to focus on big law, and we have a whole different market segment of small firms and contingency fee lawyers that don't bill by the hour.
And that data is interesting because the portion interesting to me, the portion that you mentioned about interest in generative AI, but reticence about using it, sort of supports my thesis, my hypothesis, if you will, that that's why the guidance is important. Not because we really need it, but because it sort of rolls out the red carpet for adoption, that then they can kind of wrap their arms around the guidance and feel all safe and secure. Even though they could have pulled it from other opinions that weren't specifically about AI or generative AI. So that's interesting to me. And I love how I really like watching everybody's coming out with generative AI surveys and analysis, and normally I'd be like, I'm kind of sick of that. But as we know, it's like changing by the week. Like there's always this new thing happening. So every single data point, because of how fast things are moving, is super interesting to me. And I mentioned I oversee our survey that's coming out, and I devoted a big section to generative AI stuff. So it's interesting to hear what other companies are finding from their surveys and comparing it to some of our findings, which are going to be coming out soon. But it's really interesting because it's just moving so fast that every data point really is useful rather than being too much.
Well, and that's a good point, Niki, because this survey, it just came out, but it's back data, right? I mean, I guess last year or done earlier this year. And so I think you're exactly right. A lot of these responses, when people say, 83% were uneasy with using it with legal research. If you ask a lot of people that question January of this year, you'd get a completely different answer than what you're getting today. So that's a good point.
I just wrote a couple weeks ago about the Thomson Reuters small firm survey that they do every year, state of U.S. small law firms, and that was done in August. The data was collected, and that was interesting on generative AI because in their survey, 72% of small firm lawyers say they have heard of generative AI but have not used it. And another 10% said, I've not heard of generative AI or used it. So there you got basically 82% of small firm lawyers having not used generative AI at all in their practices. Again, it kind of begs the question of whether they even know what the hell generative AI is. I remember when it used to be, when you asked lawyers, have you ever used cloud software? And Niki knows this well, and they'd say no, never, and you'd say, well, are you using Dropbox? Oh yeah, I use Dropbox all the time. I mean, they probably are using it to some extent and have no idea they're using it. But right. The other, it would also, that Thomson Reuters one has been kind of funny because year after year, the results almost never change. The stats have been very consistent in terms of the different questions they ask. This is the first year that it actually saw a change in which lawyers were sort of more productive in the sense that they were spending, for the first time in the survey, it showed an uptick in how many hours a day they spend practicing law versus doing administrative stuff, but not a huge uptick. It would be interesting if these different surveys of small firms, or for that matter of large firms or corporate legal, weren't they're all kind of a little bit apples and oranges. It's hard to kind of line them
Right.
all up and compare them and say, here's how this survey compares against this survey against this survey. And it would be, and maybe that's what the ABA survey should be doing more, or something, is kind of helping us pull together some of these disparate, what seemed like disparate results sometimes from these different surveys, and draw a more comprehensive picture.
Well,
Yeah,
here's my issue, right? I mean, like, you know, first of all, I'm impressed that you got all these lawyers, not you, but like Smokeball got all these lawyers to admit, hey, we don't know like whether we went up or down in our billings. We don't know what drives our business. We don't know any of this stuff. Like, I'm like, hey, kudos for being honest, I guess. But like, so these people are gonna then use technology, use cutting edge technology to then augment their practice. I don't know. I don't know if I buy that. Just it seems like they don't even know how their business works, let alone how they're gonna improve it. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's one of those things where it's like, okay, like it's a good snapshot of where, I guess the respondents of this survey are in terms of like, their business development and like the state of their practices and whatnot. But yeah, I don't necessarily know if this is the audience that is going to be receptive to that kind of stuff. But who knows? Maybe they'll want to learn about it.
I
Yeah,
also
I
agree
thought
with
it was kind of. Oh, go ahead, Nikki. I'm sorry.
well, I also agree with what you just said, Victor, that it's hard to believe that they don't understand how their revenue one year compares to another year. Because when I was in a relatively small firm that had 20 lawyers, probably 40 total, 50 employees, I don't know. I assure you, everybody knew exactly what their billable hours were at the end of the year, because that was where, if you were an associate, you'd get sort of your commission. And that was how the partners knew if they'd made their cut for the year and we're going to get a larger portion of the profits. So I find it hard. I don't know what firm doesn't know from year to year, at least on a personal level, as a lawyer, did my income go up or down? Like, did I make my commission or not? So that seems really weird to me. I mean, it almost sounds like you've got these solo lawyers who are just maybe in a state where marijuana was just legalized, who are smoked constantly and don't know what's happening. I mean, it's kind of confusing, some of those data.
Yeah, well, part of it too may be who was surveyed. Like, if you go to a 3 or 4 person law firm and you ask the oldest partner there some of these questions, they may not know their answer, but somebody in the firm probably does know the answer. Now, I would say that everybody in the firm, like you just described, Nikki, needs to be able to answer those kinds of questions, from the senior partner to the beginning associate. You need to understand where your growth is, and those sorts of things. But again, we're talking about firms that employ not 30 lawyers, but employ 30 people. So that's a pretty small shop. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. The other thing I was going to say is, I thought it was really kind of interesting that where you have 50% of the people saying, "Oh, AI is going to transform our practice," but then you've got 83% saying, "But there's all these ethical concerns." I mean, so like, how's it going to transform your practice if you can't like use it? It just doesn't. It did that didn't. I couldn't. So I kind of drew from that, I guess, a couple of conclusions. One, there's just a lot of confusion and misunderstanding of certain business principles that the bigger firms obviously know about. You got to have a marketing plan, right? And there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about generative AI and where it's going and what it can do. So
I was just gonna, you raised a really good point, and Kate just touched on it in the chat, in terms of who was surveyed. So when I do our legal industry survey, I ask the people to let me know their position in the firm. And the people that are not, and this year we allowed a bunch of comments to some questions, but I don't usually do that. But sometimes one of the comments would be, I don't know, I'm not in a decision-making position in the firm.
right.
So I don't have the answer to this, or I don't have the answer to that. And so I wonder if they included a lot of paralegals or associates in that who just don't know, because that's
Right.
not their job. So that's
Yeah, I was just thinking, somewhat ironically, if you went to AmLaw 50 firms and asked like a junior partner or a senior associate, well, did the firm make money last year or lose money? And they probably wouldn't know either.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for these surveys to lay out the demographics of who they're talking to and how that breaks down and what size firms and what roles in the firms and all of that. Some surveys do better at that. Some of them are really cursory in terms of what they, at least what they reveal publicly about who exactly it is they're surveying, or sometimes even the numbers. Some of these surveys you look at, sometimes some of these, not specifically, not talking about this one per se, but sometimes you get these vendor surveys where they put out a big headline about 97% of lawyers do this or that, or and they look at what they surveyed and it was like 50 lawyers somewhere, and it's like it's just like really questionable. All right.
Oh, and there's everything is surveyed now. I mean, I can't. Everybody, if we took a poll, how many surveys did you get today in your email box? I mean, it's like you're inundated with them.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, anything else? Anything else anybody wants to talk about today? Hearing nothing. I guess we can call it a little bit shorter today. Give you back a few minutes of your day, and look forward to seeing you all back here next Friday for another recap of the week's news in legal tech and innovation. See you then.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Good weekend all.
See ya.